can sometimes be excluded from a dialogue that happens largely between government, recipient government, and donor governments. The fifth principle I proposed in the paper is that the Global Compact should prioritise a range of neglected issues that are currently not being given enough attention in the education sector. Lisbeth's touched on the issue of quality of education. Several people, and the question on the internet mentioned the question of how we support education effectively in conflict countries and other areas affected by fragility. The ongoing discussion of how we move to get better data on what's happening at country level. These are all important neglected issues that we've said for many years are neglected, and so if we're going to go through a process of improving the Global Education Compact, we should take the opportunity to address them and address them creatively. And that finally, and this picks up on one of the important findings from Lisbeth's paper, that the Global Compact should promote innovation in various different ways and at various different levels. If we look across in comparison to the health sector, that sector has been much more successful in developing and promoting innovative approaches to both raising finance and delivering that finance, and bringing in private sector partners and foundation partners into that discussion. I think any effort to improve the Global Education Compact should open up that space for innovation and creativity to do things differently. So those are, as I say, what I hope are generally uncontroversial principles to guide us in our thinking about how we improve the Global Education Compact and international aid architecture. The second half of the paper then looks at a range of 4 options. And I want to emphasise that this is our first take on what these 4 options might be. There may well be others. Certainly in the discussions in Washington, there was a strong view coming out from the group that spoke there that a combination of some of these options may well be the way to go forward. But I welcome people's views in this discussion. The first option that I've suggested in the paper needs serious consideration is to continue with the existing and ongoing reform of the FTI. There is a process in place. There's a discussion that will be carried on in Rome next week at the FTI board meeting of improving and strengthening the FTI as it currently stands. This is an important discussion, and the advantage, obviously, of this option is that it has been started. It therefore would not necessarily need high-level political attention in order to carry it forward. The disadvantage is that same thing in some ways, but looked at the other way, because that discussion is largely at the technical level and largely about making technical changes. We're unlikely to secure high-level political attention, or indeed need high-level political attention in terms of carrying it forward. But I think it's an option that's out there and worth considering. The second option that I've characterised in the paper is an option of transforming the FTI. And the major difference that I proposed in the paper of transformation rather than reform would be a significant change in the governance and management arrangements of the FTI and a significant change in the scale of ambition of the FTI currently. The FTI currently, countries endorsed, cover about 20% of the children out of school. The large population countries where a large number of children out of school are not within the FTI as it stands at the moment. And in my view, some would dispute this, in its current arrangement, it could not cope with a large-scale scaling up of programs in countries like Nigeria, the DRC or Sudan. So a transformation would involve an increase in ambition, an increase in scale, and it would involve a significant change in the governance and management arrangements, and in particular a greater independence from the World Bank. And that actually you would create some space for innovation and creativity and new partners to come in, because you wouldn't have the same very strong linkage within the World Bank. The other benefit of that, in my view, would be you'd create more space within the FDI partnership for the bank to operate qua bank. And I think in some ways that we were tying the bank's hands to operate in its own identity by giving it such a strong link at the moment at multiple levels with the FDI. So that's the second option. There are risks associated with that, and that probably would need some high-level political attention and some drivers pushing it forward from various different, probably donor countries initially. The third option, which several agencies have called for and have advocated, particularly in the US, is to go full ahead and create a new global fund for education, modelled along the lines of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. And this is based on, I think, the undoubted fact that the Global Fund has managed to mobilise very significant new resources to support several diseases in the health sector, and has managed to diversify and broaden the tent of partners that are working within that sector. There are other factors that the Global Fund's been challenged on and things that it's had to change, but I think those two are clearly success stories within the Global Fund. So given some of the things that Lisbeth's identified as gaps in the education sector, maybe this is something that we should give serious consideration to. The additional point I've made in the paper that a new Global Fund for Education could help us address is the issue of apparently declining technical capacity in many of the existing bilateral and multilateral donor organisations. There's a clear decline in in-house technical expertise, matched often by an increased investment from those bilateral donors. So open question, could a Global Fund for Education be structured in such a way that it helps address that issue and provides on-demand support, technical support for the country-level dialogue that was available to all donors and the countries themselves, not just to a single donor. The challenge of a new Global Fund for Education is that, particularly in the current economic climate, it would need some serious heavy lifting as far as political attention is concerned. It would need the attention of heads of state from G8, but also, I would argue, from G20 countries. And perhaps these are part of what we're talking about in broadening the tent, is creating some space for a leadership from India, from China, from South Korea in this kind of debate. But the new Global Fund for Education would create both the opportunity and the need for that sort of high-level political attention. This proposal is controversial and there's a lot of debate around it, but I think for me it's worth considering and worth having on the table. And then the last option that I've covered in the paper is a bit of a flavour of the month, I would say, at the moment in amongst donor organisations, which is the creating not of a separate global fund, but of a financing facility type approach, a virtual fund, if you like, whereby several different sources of financing, existing sources of financing, are brought under a single umbrella, which is then packaged together into a financing facility or a virtual fund. It has various names. The food security sector, if you look closely at the language coming out of the Rome G8, this is what's being proposed in that sector. A lot of the debate around the climate change financing is also looking at a financing facility. This has the obvious advantage that you're not creating a new institution, you're not creating a new stream of funding, and you're trying to bring together and harmonise better existing streams of funding. It has the disadvantage that there is a risk that the virtual fund never turns into real money, and there's a repackaging of existing money, and I think that's certainly a risk that several critics of financing facility approach have flagged. But again, I think it's worth considering. It was a part of the original concept of the FTI. The FTI should in some ways try to catalyse and bring in funding from bilateral and multilateral donors as well as the catalytic fund. In reality, that hasn't happened, and the evaluation is showing pretty clearly that there hasn't been a significant increase in other sources of funding. In order to make it happen, it would need to have an entity that had a clear mandate and significant technical ability to call to account different bilateral and multilateral donors, as well as the countries themselves, for commitments they had made and delivery of those commitments. And it would need a degree of independence to monitor and to report back on that. So it would need some significant change to the current arrangements, in my view. So those are the four options as I see them. As I say, there may be others, I'm sure there are. And I think that it may well be that we end up with a combination of options in order to get the best fit. But my kind of working assumption at the moment is that the current international aid architecture for education is not fit for the purpose that we want it to achieve, and that we do need, and actually with a G20 discussion particularly, we have a significant opportunity to do things differently and to try and address some of the issues that Lisbeth's paper was raising in terms of deficit in the sector currently.
Thank you very much indeed, Desmond, for that interesting